Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Welcome to this episode of Money and the Demeaning of Life, the tragedy of Peter Mandelson. So, our story starts about Peter Mandelson from the 1970s. The 1970s is a difficult decade in the history of the UK, and it is dominated by two heavyweights, one conservative and one Labour. The one who is from Labour is Mr. Wilson, and the Conservative leader is Mr. Heath, Mr. Ed Heath. And Ed Heath and Wilson see power oscillate between themselves at least from 1966. From 1966 to 1970, it's Mr. Wilson, and then there's Mr. Heath, and then Mr. Wilson and Mr. Cahan again. So, the 1970s is described as a period of what was called at that time a relative decline. And the relative decline saw a number of things. It became a relative decline because two big events took place in that period of time. One was the Deep Depression. The Deep Depression came in the early 1970s. And then there was the Winter of Discontent, which basically starts from December 1978 and continues till 1979 February. And what happens in this period of time? Basically, in this period of time, there are no people in the streets to collect garbage. There is constant disruption. The GDP of the UK continues to fall and unemployment rises. And why is all this happening? This is mainly happening because, the perspectives differ. The Labour government believes that there are certain things that are causing it, and the Conservatives believe that there are other things causing it, but the Conservatives mainly lay the blame on the power of the unions. And the power of the unions is shown and is manifested in its most violent and its most potent in 1974. What happens in 1974 is that an election takes place, and there is a hung parliament. Now, what is a hung parliament? A hung parliament is a situation in which no party gets a clear majority. So when no party got a clear majority, what was the solution? The solution was that you go to the electorate again. Now, this is not very good, even in a country like the UK. This is not a good situation where one country goes into a general election twice in 1 year. But that's what happens in the UK. And what is the reason behind this? The reason behind this is what may be called, or what was called, the miners' strike. So the miners struck, and it embarrassed the government. And Edward Heath lost the first election. In the first election in 1974, he was not able to form a government. And in the second election, he suffered a downright defeat, with Mr. Harold Wilson coming back into power. Remember, Harold Wilson was there in 1970, then he lost, and he came back again in 1974 because of a minor strike. And in these two governments, two very different people are introduced in government. Mr. Heath introduces a little-known person who previously had just worked as an under-secretary in the Department of Pensions, I think. And she had only started her career in 1957, and that person was Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. Mrs. Margaret Thatcher had held no position of power, no position of any repute anywhere before Edward Heath bestowed the special favor on her and made her Education Secretary and the Secretary for Science, which was at one time one Department of Education and Science. And she is looking at the power that the miners can have. But what happens in 1974 is that the party starts blaming Edward Heath for the loss. And instead of Margaret Thatcher coming to his defense, Margaret Thatcher joins the opposing side, and she says, yes, this defeat, these consecutive defeats in 1974 were the result of the mishandling by Ed Heath, and Ed Heath is ousted. And of course, that propels Margaret Thatcher immediately, because Margaret Thatcher is seen as the person who made the ouster of Ed Heath possible. On the other hand, there is another man who has been introduced on the other side by Harold Wilson. and that man is Tony Benn. Now, Tony Benn is the exact opposite of Margaret Thatcher. He is a democratic socialist, which means that he does not believe in capitalism whatsoever. Okay, these things can be very fancy, but explanation is very simple. He does not believe in capitalism whatsoever, but he strongly believes what is common between the social democrats and the democratic socialists and the conservatives and the others is that they do believe in democracy very strongly. It's like an article of faith for them. But he wants to use democracy to undermine the other tenet of political religion, if I may call that, which is capitalism. He does not believe, he thinks that capitalism is incorrigible. He believes that capitalism can never come to any good. So he believes in what was called at the time collective responsibility. The Prime Minister must stop acting like a monarch to the cabinet. He is not acting like a monarch to the people, but he's acting to them like a monarch to the cabinet and to the parliament. All his actions must be vetted by Parliament, and the action of each and every minister has to be vetted by Parliament. So this is like taking representation to a very high extreme. Also, Tony Benn is a unilateralist. So people are very, very angry with the unions, and in this situation, Tony Benn makes another suggestion, which again is not suggestion, it's a policy. And the policy is that now unions must have absolute power. Unions should decide. Unions, everything should be nationalized, and unions must decide what should be done, what policies must be enacted. And he is going against the very momentum of history. He doesn't really understand what's happening. Though he's a very noble person, his intentions are very noble. He wants to empower people, and he wants democratic institutions to empower them. He is not really a obstructionist or an annihilist in any case. So, come the 1979 election, and in this election, the unions are very, very unpopular. And Mrs. Margaret Thatcher wins in a landslide from the Finchley constituency. Labour does not have any answer to her policies or her style. Remember, she was also a prime minister of great style. She used television to maximum effect. It was something that was started by Harold Wilson because he was inspired by Kennedy since the Kennedy-Nixon debates. But it was Margaret Thatcher who employed forms like Sashi and Sashi to manage her image and to manage her campaign. But she also took full advantage of the winter of discontent. Remember the time in 1978 to 79 where the British people were very, very angry with the unions. And she comes in and then another incident happens at the same time, which is that in the United States, Reagan comes into power, and as soon as he comes into power, there is a strike by air traffic controllers. And Reagan does not give in to their demands. He immediately sacks everyone. August 1981, a very large number of people were sacked, and this gives a lot of encouragement to Margaret Thatcher. A new time has arrived where people will not be able to hold governments to hostage by telling them what they will do if their demands were not met. So, come the 1983 elections, the Labour Party is led by Michael Foot. And Michael Foot, I'm not sure, don't hold me to it, I'm not sure if he is very impressed with Tony Benn, but the manifesto that he adopts for the Labour Party has often been called the longest suicide note in history. So he basically puts in all the things that are on the extreme left, what the extreme left wants. The left wants what? Nationalization, power to the unions. Who is going to run the government? By reading the manifesto, it appears that only the unions are going to run the government in the future. What is the result? The result is that Labour suffers a humiliating defeat in the 1983 election. And when that humiliating defeat comes, Tony Benn from Bristol East is also defeated, and he is replaced by a man named Jonathan Saeed, who is the son of an Indian Muslim immigrant. And he wins from the Conservative Party. Tony Benn is defeated, comprehensively defeated. Labour is out. Margaret Thatcher's Conservative Party gets a majority of a thumping 144 seats. She's just over the moon. And it is realized immediately that Labour is out of touch. It's something like what's happening in Israel today. Labour has been wiped out. One reason why there is so much trouble is that effectively they have no opposition in that country. So the same was true of England at the time. Labour is out. But just as every heavyweight in the Labour Party is leaving and he's being booted out by the electorate, two young men are getting in. They are coming in. And I think they are coming in because they are no record people. And people don't have a record of them to punish them for. So one of them is a former rock and roll enthusiast from St. John's College, Oxford, and his name is Anthony Blair. He was a student of law, but he hated law with a passion. What he liked was the House of Commons. And he says that when I walked into the House of Commons first, I thought that this was my place. I will not work in front of a judge. I'll probably work in front of the Speaker of the House. So maybe that's what he said to him later. I don't know. So he comes in, and he comes in from Sedgefield. By the way, if you heard of Mar-a-Lago, Mar-a-Lago is the house of Donald Trump. Tony Blair's house was later called Marabella. So, but at that time, of course, I don't think there was any Marabella. He came from Sedgefield, and he becomes an MP. And the other person who gets elected is one from Scotland, from very far away. And this is a graduate of the University of Edinburgh, and his name is Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown and Blair, they come in, and they start immediately working together because they were interested in a lot of hard things, and one of those hard things was hard work. But apart from hard work, they were interested in other hard things as well. So, so they come in, and Michael Foot resigns. When Michael Foot resigns, a new leader comes in, a charismatic leader, and his name is Neil Kinnock. And Neil Kinnock now understands. He has looked at the example of Kennedy, he has looked at the example of Wilson, he's looked at the example of Margaret Thatcher, and he knows that politics is as much about presentation as it is about policy. So he wants someone to come in and give a good image and communicate. That's the important word here, communicate Labour's message to the masses. And that man he picks from a weekend political show that had been going on for the past 3 years, from 1982 to 1985. And that person who was producing that show was Peter Mandelson. And Peter Mandelson comes in with a lot of alacrity and a lot of enthusiasm to serve the Labour Party, because this man is not just a TV producer. He is an ambitious man who has previously worked with the TUC, the Teachers Union Congress. So he comes in. He likes fame and fortune, but he also likes power. He comes in, joins the Labour Party in 1985, and starts immediately working on changing its image, and above all, communicating the message with the people. And he has his eyes on 1987, that now the election is going to take place, and he works very hard. And the first thing he does is that he removes the red flag, what a name, the red flag emblem of the Labour Party, and he replaces it with a red rose. Okay, so communists have the red flag. We have red, yes, but it's a rose. It's not about violence. It's about peaceful, political, institutional change. And that change will not be very radical. So the That's what the rose appears to promise, that the change will not be very radical. In any case, the red rose that Peter Mandelson introduced has been the official emblem of the Labour Party till this day. And the elections come. The elections come, and it seems to be working in the sense that Labour now has momentum. Labour reduces the lead of the Conservative Party from 144 in 1983 to 101 in 1987. So it's a good thing. Good things are happening. And now no one wants to rock the boat because the pieces are in place now. Kennett is the leader of the Labour Party. Communications is in the hands of a very capable man, Peter Mandelson. And Peter Mandelson he has a sort of patronizing attitude towards these two young people who have come in, Tony Blair and Brown. And when he goes into the office, he often says, "Hey boys, what's happening?" So they were the boys. In his mind, maybe he is mentoring them, though he is not really mentoring them, because they mentor, maybe if they consider anyone a mentor, that will be Neil Kinnock. But he considers himself a very important part of the transformation that is happening in Labour Party, which later becomes New Labour. So the real founder and the real person who brought about New Labour is actually Peter Mandelson. But the 1987 election reduced the lead of the Conservative Party, but they do not deliver a decisive win to Labour. Labour is defeated. But the pieces are in place. So stability is important. And they now start looking towards 1992. In the meanwhile, what happens is that the Conservative Party is divided over a number of things. And remember the miners' strike in 1974? If Mrs. Thatcher thinks or feels or hears anything about a strike by miners, she flies off the handle. Why? Because that is what brought Heath down. To her mind, in reality, it was she, as much as the miners, who brought him down. But in any case, she will never allow the miners to bring her down. And she has seen what Reagan did in 1981 to the strikers. So she does the same in 1984 to the miners. But in 1990, the miners' strike comes back in another horrible form, and that form is the poll tax violence. She's losing control over a number of things. People were sick of Labour because of these things, and these things started happening in her time, on her watch. And then things started going from bad to worse because of Britain's relationship with Europe. So in 1990, there was a major challenge to Mrs. Thatcher's leadership. If there is a challenge to Mrs. Thatcher's leadership, and that also by her very close friends, like Michael Heseltine, who is not a friend but a colleague. By the way, Michael Heseltine always hated her. But joining the attack against her is her own Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd, and then her own assistant and protégé, John Major. So in the interest of party unity, the Conservative Party decides that, look, we will not have three candidates against Mrs. Thatcher. We will have one candidate. We will not have an election. Only the party will choose a new leader and we will have a new prime minister. We'll do it very quietly. But Mandelson knows that the Labour Party is weakening from inside. And this is their time. It's their time to hit them and hit them hard. And they do. Mandelson does not work for Blair. He leaves the party and he goes and fights the election himself and he wins his seat. He becomes an MP. So now there is Blair, there's Brown, and there is the Right Honourable Mr. Mandelson, who has won his seat on his own merit. So this is where he is showing, look, I'm not here because of you. I'm here on my own merit. And then he says, I am interested in going to the very top. So Mr. Mandelson is a person who would have wanted to become prime minister in his own right. In any case, the defeat of 1992 means that Neil Kinnock's career as leader of the Labour Party is also over. And he leaves. And when he leaves, it's understandable that his old friend, John Smith, will become the head of the party. John Smith becomes the head of the party, but within 2 years, in 1994, May 11, if I remember correctly, John Smith suffers a heart attack. And after a fundraising event, and in that event, he says, the opportunity to serve, that's all we ask of you. And then he walks out and has a massive heart attack. He's taken to the hospital and he's dead. That means that the leadership battle that had been deferred 2 years ago will reignite. And now it reignites in earnest. So the first person who's assuming, because what happens is that Gordon Brown is very close to John Smith. And if John Smith becomes party leader, that means that Mr. Brown is just a heartbeat away, literally a heartbeat away from being party leader. So he goes in and he says, who were the people closest to John? Oh yeah, there were John Prescott and Elizabeth, what was her name? Elizabeth Beckett. So Elizabeth Beckett is very close and he's very close. How many votes are they getting? Not many. Brown is satisfied. Brown misses an important part here. 2 years ago, when Smith became leader of the party, I think it was the Mirror, it ran a cover story, and it said, the leader that Labour just missed. And with that caption, there was the picture of not Brown, but Blair. Not Mandelson, not Brown, but Blair. So out of the three, the press appears to be supporting Blair, neither Mandelson nor Brown. So Mandelson doesn't take that into account. He feels he's a friend to Blair, and Blair will support him unconditionally. But Blair was more ambitious than anyone ever imagined. So the press immediately started putting out stories that Blair is the favorite and Blair is going to win and Blair this, Blair that. And Blair goes to Brown and convinces him that, look, the moment is mine and you have to withdraw in my favor. And as it turned out, it became a three-way fight between Prescott, Beckett, and not Brown, but Blair, and Blair wins. So that was it. Blair is a person who convinced everybody. But now when Blair wins, then what? Brown is very good with economics. He doesn't even like foreign affairs. Blair is very good connecting with people. Please remember, Brown taught Blair how to speak in public. He was not a public speaker. But once he started speaking in public, Blair realized he could do it better than Brown, and he was determined to do it. So, Brown takes the economic affairs, the treasury, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Blair becomes Prime Minister. But where's Mandelson? Mandelson, that very hard-working man, the man who made New Labour, is nowhere. He's out, and he's told that we will think about you after 1 year. So after 1 year, he becomes Secretary for Trade. But as soon as he takes that position, a story is leaked in the press which says that Mr. Mandelson took a loan of £338,000 from a friend and it was not disclosed. If it's undisclosed, then it's a story and it goes against you. The Blair people immediately said they were not aware of any such deal, though Mr. Mandelson maintains till this day that yes, the party was informed. Whatever the case, he was forced to relinquish in disgrace. And this is the first in a string of disgraces that he's going to face. 2 years later, Mr. Mandelson is brought back in another position, I don't clearly remember which position that was, but again, in a very similar situation, he again resigns in 2001, the second disgrace that he faces. And then he leaves, he goes to the private sector, he becomes a consultant, makes a lot of money, makes a lot of fame, and he becomes friends with the fifth Baron Rothschild. And he becomes commissioner, he becomes a lot of things. And in December 2024, if I remember correctly, Keir Starmer asks him to become ambassador of the United States, because he was called the hard hitter, I think. That was his title. He was very well connected. He knew how to negotiate. He's a very brilliant person. He's a very brilliant person. He was a very brilliant person. Everyone recognized that. Even the Blair people recognized that. Blair was not a person who liked limelight for others. He had Mandelson for communications director, but he immediately appointed, after 1994, he immediately appointed Alastair Campbell to the position of PR, because Mandelson did everything, but he had very little idea about PR. But even in that situation, it was Mandelson who was dictating the overall strategy for the 1997 election, and Alastair Campbell was mainly involved in getting the message across. So the strategic part was all being handled by Peter Mandelson. But anyway, so he was appointed in 2024, he was appointed ambassador to the US. And this time again, a scandal broke. And I think the life of Peter Mandelson is full of lessons. And one of the lessons is choose your friends very carefully. As the Quran says, on that day you will see one person who will say, woe to me, had I not made him my friend who I made my close friend. Until next time, stay safe.